The wagon jolted to a stop so suddenly that Mara's head snapped forward. She caught herself against the wooden seat, splinters biting into her palms. The driver, a heavy-set man named Cullens who hadn't spoken more than 5 words since they left Bitterage, spat tobacco juice into the dust and jerked his thumb toward the horizon. "That's it." Mara followed his gesture. What she saw made her stomach drop. A house, if you could call it that, more like the skeleton of one, squatting low against the Montana prairie like something trying to hide from the sun. Gray-weathered wood, a sagging porch, windows dark as dead eyes. Behind it, a barn that leaned hard to the left. Beyond that, nothing. Just miles and miles of brown grass rolling toward mountains that looked close but probably weren't. No smoke from the chimney, no movement anywhere. "You're joking," Mara said. Cullens didn't smile. "Nope." "This is the Vance place?" "Yep." "And someone actually lives here?" "He does." Cullens reached back and grabbed her traveling bag, the only thing she owned now, and dropped it into the dirt beside the wagon. "Good luck, Miss Hale." Mara turned to him, panic rising in her throat. "Wait, you can't just leave me here. I don't even know if anyone's home." "He's home. He's always home." Cullens gathered the reins. "You want my advice? Keep your head down. Don't ask questions. Do what he tells you, and maybe you'll last longer than the others." "Others? What others?" But Cullens was already turning the wagon around, wheels kicking up dust that hung in the still air like a curtain. Within seconds, he was heading back down the rutted path they'd come from, and Mara was alone. She stood there, bag at her feet, and tried to remember how she'd gotten here. 3 weeks ago, she'd been in Bitterage, not by choice. The stagecoach she'd taken west had broken an axle outside town, and while it was being repaired, she'd made the mistake of asking around for work. Any work. She had $12 to her name and winter coming fast. Mrs. Garrett at the boarding house had looked her up and down with eyes like a banker appraising collateral. "You got references?" "No, ma'am. I'm traveling from... family?" "No." "Husband?" "No." That word, that single no, had changed everything. Mrs. Garrett's expression had shifted from curiosity to something colder. "I see." Within a day, the rumors started. Mara heard them in whispers behind her back at the general store, saw them in the way men looked at her, and women didn't. A woman alone, no family, no husband, no past she'd talk about. What else could she be but trouble? When Sheriff Denton came to her room on the 3rd night, Mara knew it was over. "You need to leave Bitterage," he'd said, not unkindly, but not gently either. "Town doesn't want your sort here." "My sort? I haven't done anything." "You're unattached. That makes people nervous." He'd pulled out a folded paper. "There's a man needs help. Ranch hand work, housekeeping. It's rough country, but you'll have a roof and meals." "Where?" "Vance Ranch, 60 miles northwest." "I don't know anything about ranch work." "Then you'll learn. Or you can try your luck elsewhere, but I'm telling you now, no town within 100 miles will take you in. Not without references. Not a woman alone." He'd set the paper on her nightstand. "Wagon leaves at dawn. Be on it." She'd wanted to scream, to fight, to tell him this was insane, that you couldn't just ship a person off like unwanted cargo, but she'd seen his face, heard the finality in his voice. So at dawn, she'd climbed into Cullen's wagon, and now here she was. Mara picked up her bag and started walking toward the house. Each step felt heavier than the last. The afternoon sun beat down without mercy, and there wasn't a breath of wind. Everything was still, dead still. The porch steps creaked under her weight. The front door was closed. She raised her hand to knock, then stopped. What if he wasn't expecting her? What if Denton had lied and there was no job and she'd just been dumped in the middle of nowhere to... The door swung open. The man standing there was tall. That was the first thing Mara noticed. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a faded work shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms roped with muscle and old scars. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, and he hadn't shaved in days. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Cold. Not cruel exactly, just empty. He looked at her the way you'd look at a stray dog that wandered onto your property. Vague annoyance mixed with the calculation of whether it was worth the effort to chase off. "You're the woman Denton sent." Not a question. "Mara Hale." She tried to keep her voice steady. I was told, I know what you were told. He stepped back, opening the door wider but not quite inviting. Get inside before you bring more dust in. Mara hesitated, then stepped past him into the house. The interior was worse than the exterior, dim. That was the second thing she noticed. All the curtains were drawn, turning midday into twilight. The front room held a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, and nothing else. No rugs, no pictures on the walls. No books or newspapers or any sign that a human being actually lived here. It smelled like dust and old smoke and something else. Something stale and sad. Name's Rourke Vance. He closed the door and the room got even darker. I didn't ask for help, and I don't particularly want it. But Denton seems to think I need looking after, so here you are. Mara set her bag down. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Vance. I can... Rules. He cut her off. First, you stay out of my way. I don't want conversation. I don't want company. You do your work and we'll get along fine. What work exactly? Cooking, cleaning, laundry. Garden's dead, but maybe you can bring it back. Chickens need tending. We'll pump sticks sometimes. He rattled it off like he was reading from a list. You get Sundays off. Don't go into my room or the back shed. Don't touch my things. Where do I sleep? He gestured toward a narrow hallway. Room at the end used to be... He stopped. His jaw tightened. It's empty now. You can have it. Mara wanted to ask more questions. Where was the nearest neighbor? How often did supplies come? What happened to whoever lived in that room before? But something in Rourke's face told her to shut up. Thank you, she said instead. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. Don't thank me yet. Then he walked out, letting the screen door slam behind him, leaving Mara alone in the gloom. Demand. The room at the end of the hall was small. A bed with a thin mattress. A dresser with one drawer that stuck. A window so covered in grime she couldn't see through it. The whole space felt like it had been holding its breath for years. Mara sat on the bed and put her head in her hands. This was a mistake. A terrible mistake. But what choice did she have? Walk 60 miles back to Bitterage? They'd already made it clear she wasn't welcome. Keep heading west? With $12 and winter breathing down her neck? No. She was stuck here. At least for now. She stood and opened the window, fighting with the latch until it finally gave. Fresh air rushed in, or what passed for fresh in this dry, endless landscape. She looked out at the yard. A vegetable garden, like Rourke said, but it was just dead stalks and hard dirt now. The chicken coop was missing half its fence. Everything had the look of slow collapse. But it was the barn that caught her attention. The door was open, and inside she could see Rourke moving around. He was working on something, she couldn't tell what from this distance. His movements were efficient, practiced. A man who knew what he was doing. A man who wanted to be left alone. Well, Mara thought, that makes 2 of us. She spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning her room. There wasn't much to work with. No broom, no rags, nothing. So she used the hem of her traveling dress to wipe down surfaces and tried to shake the dust out of the mattress. It wasn't much, but by the time the sun started sinking, the space felt a little more like hers and a little less like a tomb. When she ventured back out to the main room, she found a note on the table. Stew in the pot. Eat if you want. Don't wait for me. The handwriting was blocky, impatient. Mara lifted the lid on the pot sitting on the stove. Inside was something that technically qualified as stew. Potatoes, onions, chunks of meat that might have been venison. It smelled fine. She ladled some into a bowl and ate standing up, watching through the window as the sky turned from blue to orange to deep purple. Rourke didn't come back inside until after dark. She heard the front door open and close, heard his boots on the floorboards, but he didn't speak to her, and she didn't speak to him. He just walked past, went to his room, and shut the door. That was the pattern for the next 3 days. Mara woke before sunrise on the 4th morning and decided to make herself useful. She found flour and lard in the pantry, both nearly gone, and managed to make a passable batch of biscuits. There were eggs from the chickens, though she had to fight the hens for them, and she fried those up with some salt pork. When Rourke emerged from his room just after dawn, there was a plate waiting for him on the table. He looked at it, looked at her, said nothing, but he sat down and ate. Mara took that as a victory. Over the next few days, she learned the rhythm of the place. Rourke was up before the sun, out working until noon, then gone again in the afternoon. He never explained what he was doing, and she never asked. She focused on the house, sweeping, scrubbing, airing out rooms that hadn't seen light in what felt like decades. She fixed the chicken fence using wire she found in the barn. She hauled water from the well until her shoulders ached. It was brutal work, and Rourke never once thanked her, but he also never complained. On the 8th day, Mara decided to tackle the front room. The curtains were so thick with dust she could barely breathe while taking them down, but once they were off, sunlight poured in. Real sunlight. It transformed the space. She was standing on a chair wiping down the window frames when Rourke came in. He stopped in the doorway and stared. "What the hell are you doing?" Mara looked down at him. "Cleaning." "I didn't tell you to touch those curtains." "You didn't tell me not to." His jaw worked. "Put them back." "Why?" "Because I said so." Mara climbed down from the chair, rag still in hand. She met his eyes. "Mr. Vance, I've been here over a week. I've cooked your meals, cleaned your floors, and worked from sunup to sundown without a single word of acknowledgement from you. The least you can do is let me have some light while I work." Something flickered in his expression. Anger, maybe, or surprise that she'd talked back. "You don't know what you're doing," he said quietly. "I'm letting in the sun. That's all." "It's not all." His voice dropped even lower. "It's never all." He turned and walked out before she could respond. Mara stood there, heart pounding, unsure what had just happened. She left the curtains down. That night she woke to the sound of breaking glass. It came from the front room, a sharp crash followed by silence. Mara sat up in bed, pulse racing. For a moment she considered staying put. It wasn't her business. Rourke had made it clear he didn't want her involved in his life. But what if he was hurt? She got up, grabbed her shawl, and crept down the hallway. The front room was dark except for the moonlight coming through the windows, her windows, still bare. And in that pale light, she saw Rourke. He was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, a broken whiskey bottle in pieces around him. His head was in his hands. "Mr. Vance?" He didn't look up. "Get out." "Are you hurt?" "I said get out." Mara should have listened. She knew that, but something about the way he sat there, hunched, defeated, looking more like a man who'd lost a fight with himself than anything else, made her stay. "Let me help." "You can't." His voice was raw. "Nobody can." She knelt down a few feet away, careful of the glass. "What happened?" "Nothing. Everything. Does it matter?" He finally looked at her and his eyes were bloodshot. "You want to know why I don't want light in this house? Because every time I see it, I remember." "Remember what?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, "My wife, my daughter. They loved mornings. Sarah would open all the curtains first thing, let the sun in. Lily would sit right there," he pointed to a spot near the window, "and draw pictures. Every morning, like clockwork." Mara's chest tightened. "What happened to them?" "Raiders 3 years ago. Came through looking for cattle. I was out checking fence lines. By the time I got back..." He stopped, swallowed hard. There was nothing left to save. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It doesn't change anything." "Is that why you're out here alone?" "I'm not alone. I've got the ranch." "That's not the same thing." He laughed, bitter and sharp. "You've been here what, 10 days? And you think you know me? I know you're hiding. Maybe I am. Maybe that's the only way to survive this." Mara stood and fetched a rag from the kitchen. She knelt again and started carefully picking up the larger pieces of glass, wrapping them so they wouldn't cut. "You don't have to do that," Rourke said. "I know. I'm not worth the effort." "That's not for you to decide." They sat in silence while she cleaned. When she was done, she stood and looked down at him. "You can keep the curtains closed if you want, but I'm not putting them back up. If you want darkness that badly, you'll have to do it yourself." She left him there and went back to bed. The next morning, the curtains were still down. 2 weeks in, Mara found the music box. She was cleaning out the pantry, an endless job because mice had gotten into everything, when she knocked over a crate in the back. Inside, wrapped in old newspaper, was a small wooden box with a delicate crank on the side. She opened it carefully. The mechanism inside was tarnished but intact. She turned the crank, and after a few stuttering notes, a melody emerged. Something soft and wistful. A lullaby, maybe. "Where did you find that?" Mara jumped. She hadn't heard Rourke come in. "I'm sorry, I was just—" "That was Lily's." He stood in the doorway, staring at the box in her hands. "Sarah bought it for her 5th birthday. It's beautiful." "It's broken, like everything else here." Mara turned the crank again. The music played, thin but clear. "It's not broken. It just needed someone to wind it." Rourke's face did something complicated. For a second, she thought he might cry, or yell, or both. But he just turned and walked away. That night, she left the music box on the table in the front room. The next morning, it was gone. Oko. 3 weeks in, and the house had started to change. Not in big ways, but in small ones. The windows stayed clean, meals were regular. The garden, still mostly dead, had at least been cleared of weeds. Mara even managed to coax a few late-season greens to sprout in one corner. Rourke still didn't talk much, but sometimes, when she was cooking or mending clothes, she'd catch him watching her. Not in a threatening way, more like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. One evening, while she was peeling potatoes, he spoke. "Why'd you leave wherever you came from?" Mara didn't look up. "Does it matter?" "You've been here almost a month. I think I have a right to know if the law is looking for you." "They're not." "Then why?" She set down the knife. "Because staying would have killed me. Not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Yeah, I know that feeling." It was the most honest thing he'd said to her. The trouble came on a Sunday. Mara was hanging laundry. She'd finally found enough soap to wash the bedding when she heard horses. 3 of them, coming up the road fast. Rourke was in the barn. She ran to get him. "Someone's coming." He looked up from the harness he was mending, and something in his face went hard. "How many?" 3 riders. "Get in the house. Lock the door." "What's—" "Now, Mara." She'd never heard him use her first name before. The urgency in his voice sent her running. From the window, she watched as the riders pulled up in front of the barn. 3 men, all rough-looking, all armed. One of them, a big man with a red beard, dismounted and walked toward Rourke. "Vance, heard you got yourself some company." Rourke didn't move. "Turn around and leave, Tagert. That's not friendly. We just came to meet your new girl." "She's not my girl, she's a housekeeper." "Housekeeper." Tagert laughed, and the other 2 joined in. "That what they're calling it now?" "I'm not going to tell you again. Leave." "Or what? You'll shoot us?" 3 against 1, Vance. You might get one of us, but the other 2 will put you down." Mara's hands were shaking. She'd seen men like this before. Men who thought the world owed them whatever they wanted. And if you were unlucky enough to be in their path, well, that was your problem. Rourke's voice carried through the open window, low and deadly calm. "I've killed more than 3 men, Tagert. Some for less than what you're thinking about doing right now. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back on your horse, ride back to town, and tell everyone you saw that the Vance place isn't worth the trip. And if you don't, I'm going to make sure the next person who finds you needs a shovel to bury what's left." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Tagert spat in the dirt. "You're crazy, Vance, always have been." "That's right. I'm crazy. Which means you should leave while you still can." Tagert looked toward the house. Mara shrank back from the window, but she knew he'd seen her. "This ain't over," he said. "Yes, it is." The 3 men mounted up and rode off, but not before Tagert turned and gave Rourke a look that promised trouble. When they were gone, Mara unlocked the door and stepped out. Rourke was still standing in the same spot, watching the road. "Who were they?" "Nobody important. They threatened you. They threaten everyone. It's what they do." "Will they come back?" Rourke turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw something other than ice in his eyes. Something that might have been regret. Probably. That night, Rourke stayed up late. Mara could hear him moving around the house, checking windows, testing the locks on the doors. She wanted to ask what he was doing, but she knew better. Instead, she made coffee and brought him a cup. He took it without a word. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For earlier." "Don't thank me. They'll be back, and next time they might bring more men." Then we'll deal with it. He looked at her. We? I'm here, aren't I? You shouldn't be. This place? It's cursed. Everyone who stays here gets hurt. I don't believe in curses. You should. Mara sat down across from him. Tell me something, Mr. Vance. Why did you let me stay? You could have sent me back with Cullens that first day. He stared into his coffee. I don't know. Maybe I thought it'd be different this time. Different how? Like maybe if I kept someone alive, it'd make up for the ones I couldn't save. The pain in his voice was so raw that Mara had to look away. You can't bring them back, she said softly. Your wife, your daughter. No matter how much you suffer, it won't bring them back. I know. So why keep punishing yourself? Because it's easier than forgiving myself. They sat in silence after that. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Mara realized something. She wasn't leaving. Not because she had nowhere else to go, though that was true, but because somewhere in the past few weeks, this broken place and this broken man had become hers to care for. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something worth fighting for. The days after Tagert's visit moved slower, weighted down by the certainty that something bad was coming. Rourke started carrying his rifle everywhere, to the barn, to check the fence lines, even just to walk to the well. He didn't say much about it, but Mara noticed the way his eyes scanned the horizon constantly, the way he positioned himself between her and the open road whenever they were outside together. She tried to keep working like normal, tried to pretend the threat wasn't sitting on her chest every morning when she woke up. But it was hard to ignore the tension that had settled over the ranch like a storm cloud that wouldn't break. On the 5th day, Rourke came in from the barn earlier than usual. Mara was kneading bread dough, her hands covered in flour, when he walked through the door and stood there watching her. We need to talk, he said. She didn't like the sound of that. About what? About you leaving. Mara's hands stilled. I'm not leaving. You should. Tagert's not the type to let things go. He'll come back, and when he does, he won't be alone. So we'll deal with it when it happens. There's no we in this, Mara. This is my problem. She turned to face him fully, anger rising hot in her throat. Your problem. I'm the one they came to see. I'm the one Tagert was looking at like I was something he could take. You think I don't know what men like that do to women when nobody's watching? Rourke's jaw tightened. That's exactly why you need to go. Go where? Back to Bitterage? They didn't want me there either. Keep heading west with winter coming and $12 to my name? I'd be dead inside a month. Better dead out there than what'll happen if you stay here. You don't get to make that choice for me. They stared at each other across the kitchen, two stubborn people who'd already lost too much to back down now. Finally, Rourke looked away. I can't protect you. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Mara wiped her hands on her apron and took a step closer. I'm asking you to stop trying to push me away. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But running doesn't fix anything. It just means they win. Who's they? Everyone who ever told us we don't belong anywhere. Everyone who looked at us and decided we weren't worth the effort. She paused. I'm done running, Rourke. If you want me gone, you're going to have to throw me out yourself. He studied her face for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Not softened, exactly, but changed. You're stubborn as hell, he said quietly. So are you. This is a mistake. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. Rourke shook his head, but he didn't argue anymore. He just walked back outside, and Mara returned to her bread, hands shaking slightly as she worked the dough. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Rourke ate dinner at the table with her instead of taking his plate to his room. They didn't talk much, just small comments about the food, the weather, whether the chickens were laying well, but it felt different. Like a door had opened just a crack and neither of them was quite ready to slam it shut again. When Mara got up to clear the dishes, Rourke spoke. My wife, Sarah, she was stubborn too, used to drive me crazy. He stared at his empty plate. She grew up in St. Louis, had every reason to stay there, marry some banker or lawyer. But she wanted adventure, wanted to see the frontier. Her parents thought she'd lost her mind when she agreed to marry me. Why did she? Hell if I know. I wasn't much to look at even then. Had a temper, didn't have two coins to rub together. But she said she saw something in me worth saving. He paused. Guess she was wrong about that. She wasn't wrong. How would you know? Because you're still here. You could have given up after they died. Could have eaten a bullet or drunk yourself to death. But you didn't. You kept the ranch going. That takes strength. Or cowardice. Maybe I just didn't have the guts to follow them. Mara set the dishes down and sat back at the table. Tell me about your daughter. Rourke's face did that complicated thing again, like he wanted to shut down but couldn't quite manage it. Lily, she was 6, smart as a whip, had Sarah's eyes and my stubborn streak. His voice roughened. She wanted to be a doctor. Can you imagine? 6 years old and already planning her whole life. Used to bandage up her dolls, make me tell her what every plant in the garden was good for. She sounds amazing. She was. They both were. He stood abruptly. I'm turning in. Don't stay up too late. He was gone before she could respond. But later, lying in bed, Mara heard something she'd never heard before. Music. Faint and distant, but unmistakable. The lullaby from Lily's music box, playing somewhere in Rourke's room. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. And for the first time since arriving at this godforsaken ranch, she felt something almost like hope. The next morning, everything went to hell. Mara was feeding the chickens when she heard the horses. More than 3 this time. She dropped the feed bucket and ran for the house, but she wasn't fast enough. 5 riders came around the barn, moving fast. Tagert was in front, grinning like he'd already won. Behind him were 4 men she didn't recognize, all armed, all looking mean. Rourke came out of the barn at a dead run, rifle in hand. Get inside, Mara! But Tagert's horse cut her off from the house. She stumbled backward, nearly falling. Well, well, Tagert said, dismounting. Look at this. The widow's trying to run. I'm not a widow. Not married, then. Even better. He took a step closer. Mara could smell whiskey on him even from 6 feet away. You know what your problem is, sweetheart? You're with the wrong man. Get away from her. Rourke's voice cut through the morning air, sharp as broken glass. Tagert turned, still grinning. Now, Vance, is that any way to treat guests? You're not guests. You're trespassing. You've got 10 seconds to get off my land. Or what? You'll shoot all 5 of us? Tagert laughed. You ain't that fast. Try me. The other 4 men had spread out now, forming a loose semicircle. One of them, a lean man with a scar across his cheek, had his hand on his pistol. Mara's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Here's the thing, Tagert said, still casual, still smiling. Word around town is you're keeping this woman here against her will. Sheriff Denton's concerned. Asked us to come check on her welfare. That's a lie. Is it? How about we ask the lady herself? Tagert turned to Mara. You want to be here, sweetheart? Or is Vance holding you prisoner? Mara's throat was dry, but she forced the words out. I'm here by choice. You sure about that? Because from where I'm standing, looks like you're scared out of your mind. I'm scared of you, not him. Tagert's smile faltered. That's not very friendly. I don't care. You should. See, we got the law on our side. Sheriff says if you want to leave with us, Vance can't stop you. So what do you say? Want to come back to town where it's safe? This is safe. Doesn't look safe to me. Looks like you're stuck out here in the middle of nowhere with a man who's half crazy and completely broke. That's not much of a life. It's my life. Tagert's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. The only mistake here is you thinking you can intimidate me. Mara's voice was steadier now, fueled by anger instead of fear. I've dealt with men like you before. Men who think they can take whatever they want just because they're bigger and meaner. But you can't take me. I don't belong to you, I don't belong to the town, and I sure as hell don't belong to Sheriff Denton. One of the other men laughed. She's got a mouth on her. Shut up, Crenshaw. Tagert's attention was still locked on Mara. You think you're tough? You think Vance here can protect you? I think you should leave before someone gets hurt. That a threat? It's a promise. Rourke moved then, stepping between Mara and Tagert, rifle aimed dead center at the bigger man's chest. Last chance, Tagert. Ride out, or I drop you right here. For a second, nobody moved. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then Tagert spat in the dirt again. You're both crazy, but fine, we'll go. For now. He remounted his horse, but before he turned it around, he looked at Rourke one more time. Enjoy your time with her, Vance, because it won't last. Nothing good ever does out here. The 5 riders left in a cloud of dust, and Mara felt her knees go weak. Rourke caught her before she fell. I've got you, he said quietly, and for the first time in her life, Mara believed it. They stood there in the yard for a long moment, neither of them speaking. When Mara finally pulled away, Rourke was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. They could have. They didn't. Rourke exhaled hard. You're going to get yourself killed. So are you. He almost smiled. Almost. Come on, he said. Let's get inside before they decide to come back. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. Rourke checked every window, every door, every possible entry point. He moved furniture to block certain angles, made sure there was water inside in case they got trapped. Mara watched him work, understanding now why he'd been alone for so long. This wasn't just a ranch. It was a fortress, a place built to keep the world out. But that evening, after the sun went down and the sky turned the color of bruises, Rourke did something unexpected. He opened the curtains. All of them. Mara looked up from the stove where she was making soup. What are you doing? If they're coming back, I want to see them. He met her eyes. And I'm done hiding. It was a small thing. Such a small thing. But it felt like a victory. They ate dinner together again, and this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was almost comfortable. When they were done, Rourke poured himself a glass of whiskey and offered one to Mara. She took it even though she didn't much like the taste. To bad decisions, Rourke said, raising his glass. To survival, Mara countered. They drank. Tell me something, Rourke said after a moment. What made you think you could handle this place? I didn't think I could. I just didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not when all your options are bad. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I know that feeling. Mara turned her glass in her hands. Can I ask you something? Depends on what it is. Why didn't you leave after they died? You could have sold the ranch, gone somewhere new, started over. Rourke stared into his whiskey like it held answers. Because this place is all I have left of them. Sarah loved this land. Used to stand right there, he pointed to the front window, and watch the sunrise every morning. Said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. And Lily, she used to help me with the horses. Got thrown once, scared the hell out of me, but she got right back on. Said she wasn't going to let a little fall stop her. His voice cracked on the last word. Leaving would have felt like erasing them, he continued. Like saying they didn't matter, so I stayed. Even though every corner of this house reminds me of what I lost. That's not erasing them. That's honoring them. Doesn't feel like honor. Feels like torture. Maybe it's both. Rourke looked at her then, really looked at her, and Mara saw past the coldness to the grief underneath. Raw and endless. You ever lost someone? He asked. My mother. Fever took her when I was 12. My father followed 6 months later. Couldn't live without her, I guess. What did you do? Survived. Barely. Went to live with an aunt who didn't want me. Worked in her boarding house until I was old enough to leave. And then I just kept moving, kept looking for somewhere that felt like home. She paused. Never found it. Until maybe now. This isn't home, Mara. It's barely a house. Home isn't a place. It's people. Rourke shook his head, but he didn't argue. Later, after he'd gone to bed, Mara sat alone in the front room and looked out at the dark prairie. Somewhere out there, Tagert and his men were probably planning their next move. Somewhere out there, the whole town of Bitterage thought she was either a victim or a whore, or both. But here, in this drafty house with its ghosts and its broken man, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt needed. The attack came 3 days later. Mara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, heart pounding, and ran to the window. Orange light flickered outside, fire coming from the direction of the barn. Rourke! She heard him moving in the next room, heard the thud of boots on floorboards. He burst into the hallway, already dressed, rifle in hand. Stay inside, he barked. Like hell. She grabbed the shotgun Rourke kept by the front door and followed him out. The barn was fully engulfed. Flames licked up the walls, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. The horses were screaming inside. "We have to get them out!" Mara shouted over the roar of the fire. Rourke was already running. He threw open the barn door and disappeared into the smoke. Mara went after him, ignoring his earlier order, ignoring everything except the sound of those terrified animals. Inside was chaos, heat and smoke and noise. She could barely see, could barely breathe. But she found the first stall and threw it open, slapping the horse's flank to drive it out. The animal bolted past her, wild-eyed. Rourke was doing the same on the other side. They worked in frantic silence, coughing, choking, until all 4 horses were out and the barn was empty of everything except flames. They stumbled into the yard, lungs burning, and watched the structure collapse in on itself with a sound like the world ending. "Who did this?" Mara gasped. Rourke didn't answer. He was staring at something beyond the firelight. A group of riders sat on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Even from this distance, Mara could make out Tagert's broad shape. "They're not even trying to hide it," she said. "They don't have to. Who's going to stop them? There's no law out here except what you make yourself." "Then we make our own." Rourke looked at her. "This isn't your fight." "Stop saying that. It became my fight the moment they tried to drag me away." "Mara, no, listen to me. We can rebuild the barn. We can replace what we lost. But if we back down now, they'll never stop. They'll just keep coming, keep taking, until there's nothing left. So what do you want to do? Shoot our way through the whole town?" "I want to fight smart, not hard. And the first rule of fighting smart is making sure everyone knows what's really happening here." "Nobody cares what's happening here." "Then we make them care." Rourke was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. "All right. What's your plan?" Mara looked at the burning barn, at the horses milling nervously in the yard, at the distant figures on the ridge who thought they'd already won. "We go to the territorial marshal. We document every threat, every act of violence. We make it official. The nearest marshal is in Helena. That's a 3-day ride. Then we start riding. They'll follow us. Could ambush us anywhere along the road. Let them try." Rourke studied her face in the firelight. "You really are stubborn as hell." "I learned from the best." He almost smiled again. "All right. We leave at first light. Pack light. Food, water, ammunition, and Mara?" "Yeah?" "Stay close to me. I'm not losing anyone else." They spent the rest of the night preparing. Mara filled canteens, wrapped bread and dried meat, checked the ammunition for both the rifle and shotgun. Rourke saddled 2 horses, a sturdy mare for her, his own gelding for himself. By the time the sun started to rise, they were ready. Mara took one last look at the ranch. The barn was just smoking ruins now, and the house looked small and vulnerable in the dawn light. Everything she'd worked for over the past month felt fragile, like it could disappear with a strong wind. But she wasn't running away. She was running toward something. Toward justice. Toward a future that didn't involve looking over her shoulder every day. "You ready?" Rourke asked. Mara swung up into the saddle. "Let's go." They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, 2 figures against an endless sky, heading toward a town that might save them or condemn them. But they rode together. And that, Mara thought, made all the difference. The first day of riding was brutal. The sun climbed high and merciless, turning the prairie into a furnace. Mara's legs ached from gripping the saddle. Her back screamed from the constant jarring, and by midday her throat was so dry she could barely swallow. But she didn't complain. Rourke kept glancing back at her like he expected her to fall off the horse any minute, and she was determined to prove him wrong. They stopped once around noon to rest the horses and eat. Rourke handed her a canteen and she drank sparingly, knowing they had 2 more days of this ahead. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." "I'm fine enough." She tore off a piece of bread and forced it down, even though she wasn't hungry. "How far behind us do you think they are?" Rourke scanned the horizon. "Hard to say. If they're smart, they'll take a different route and try to get ahead of us, set up an ambush somewhere between here and Helena. And if they're not smart, then they'll just follow us and wait for us to make a mistake." Mara shifted on the hard ground, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. "What happens when we get to Helena? What if the marshal doesn't believe us? Then we're back where we started. Except now Tagert knows we tried to bring the law into it, which means he'll come at us even harder. You're a real optimist, you know that? Rourke's mouth twitched. Just being realistic. Well, your realism is depressing. Welcome to the frontier. They rode on. The landscape didn't change much, just endless rolling grassland broken up by occasional clusters of cottonwoods near dry creek beds. Once they saw a herd of antelope in the distance, moving like liquid across the prairie. Another time, a hawk circled overhead, riding thermals Mara couldn't feel from the ground. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, like the land itself was testing them. As the sun started to sink, Rourke found a spot to make camp, a small depression protected on 3 sides by rocky outcroppings. Not perfect, but defensible. No fire, he said as they unsaddled the horses. Don't want to advertise where we are. So they ate cold food and drank warm water and sat in the gathering darkness while the temperature dropped. Mara wrapped herself in a blanket and tried not to think about how exposed they were out here, how easy it would be for someone to ride up in the night and, "Stop," Rourke said quietly. "Stop what?" "Thinking yourself into a panic. I can hear it from here." "I'm not panicking. You're breathing like you just ran a mile." Mara forced herself to slow down, to breathe deeper. "I just keep thinking about what could go wrong." "That's a long list." Not helping. Rourke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When Sarah and I first came out here, I was terrified. Every night I'd lie awake listening to every sound, convinced we were about to get raided or attacked by bears or struck by lightning. Drove myself half crazy with it. What changed? Sarah told me I had 2 choices. I could spend every night afraid of what might happen, or I could spend it living. And if something bad did happen, well, at least I wouldn't have wasted all that time being scared. That's easier said than done." She knew that, but she also knew that fear is like a wildfire. You feed it, it grows. You starve it, it dies. He shifted position, settling his back against a rock. "I'm not saying don't be careful, but don't let the fear eat you alive either." Mara pulled the blanket tighter. "Were you scared when they died?" It was a cruel question, and she knew it, but she needed to know. Rourke was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I was furious. At myself. At the world. At every choice I'd made that led to that moment. The fear came later, when I realized I had to keep going without them." "How did you do it?" "Badly. For a long time, I did it very badly." He looked at her across the darkness. "You're the first person I've talked to about them in 3 years. The first person I've let close enough to even try." "Why me?" "Because you didn't give me a choice. You just kept showing up, kept pushing back, kept being alive in a house that had been dead for too long." He paused. "And because you remind me that maybe there's still something worth fighting for." Mara felt something shift in her chest, something warm and terrifying. "Rourke, get some sleep. I'll take first watch." He moved away before she could say anything else, settling himself at the edge of their camp where he could see the open prairie. Mara lay down on the hard ground, using her saddle as a pillow, and stared up at the stars. They were so bright out here, brighter than anything she'd ever seen in a city, like someone had punched holes in the sky and let the light pour through. She fell asleep thinking about what Rourke had said, about living instead of being afraid, about things worth fighting for. The second day was worse than the first. Mara woke before dawn with every muscle screaming, climbed back into the saddle, and tried not to groan out loud. They rode in silence, both of them scanning the horizon constantly. Around mid-morning, they spotted riders in the distance, 3 of them, moving parallel to their path. "Is that them?" Mara asked, her hand moving to the shotgun. Rourke shaded his eyes. "Can't tell from here. Could be anyone." "Should we keep riding? If they wanted to attack, they'd have done it already." But the riders stayed visible all day, always just at the edge of sight, close enough to be a threat, far enough away to make any confrontation difficult. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. Mara's nerves were stretched so tight she jumped at every sound. By the time they stopped for the night, her hands were shaking. "They're playing with us," she said, as Rourke helped her down from the horse. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. "I know. So what do we do?" We don't give them the satisfaction of seeing us scared. He handed her the canteen. Drink. You're dehydrated. She drank, then asked, what if they attack tonight? Then we fight. That's your plan? Just fight? You got a better one? Mara wanted to snap at him, but she was too tired. Instead, she sank down onto a flat rock and put her head in her hands. I'm sorry, I'm just exhausted, scared, wondering if we made the right choice. Rourke crouched in front of her. Join the club. You're scared? I've been scared since the day Sarah and Lily died. The difference is I've gotten good at hiding it. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know you're not alone in this. We're both terrified. We're both in over our heads, but we're still here, still moving forward. That counts for something. Mara looked at him, really looked at him. The gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the scars on his hands from years of hard work. He wasn't a hero from a dime novel. He was just a man who'd lost everything and kept going anyway. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. Rourke's expression softened. You made that pretty hard to do. That night they took turns keeping watch again. When it was Mara's shift, she sat with the shotgun across her knees and watched the darkness. The riders they'd seen earlier had disappeared, but she knew they were still out there, waiting. Around midnight, she heard something, a sound that didn't belong, the soft nicker of a horse that wasn't one of theirs. Mara's heart kicked into overdrive. She touched Rourke's shoulder and he was awake instantly, rifle in hand. What is it? Horses, close. They waited in tense silence. Then, from the darkness, a voice called out, Easy there, folks, we're friendly. Rourke stood, keeping his rifle aimed at the sound. Show yourself. Two figures emerged from the shadows, hands raised. They were older men, both weathered and trail-worn. One had a deputy's star pinned to his vest. Name's Deputy Marshal Frank Cordell, the one with the star said. This here's my partner, Jim Hayes. We've been tracking some trouble out of Bitterage. Heard there was a woman and a rancher heading for Helena with a story to tell. Mara stood slowly. How did you know about us? Telegraph. Helena sent word to check the route, make sure you made it through safe. Cordell lowered his hands. Mind if we come into the light so we can talk proper? Rourke hesitated, then nodded. The two men walked into camp, and in the moonlight, Mara could see they were exactly what they claimed to be. Lawmen, tired and serious and armed. Cordell had kind eyes but a hard mouth. Hayes was leaner, quieter, watching everything. You've got people following you, Cordell said without preamble. Been tracking them for the last 6 hours. They're camped about 2 miles south. Tagert's men, Rourke said. Figured as much. We've had reports about him for months now, him and that pack of troublemakers he runs with, but nobody's been willing to press charges. Cordell looked at Mara. You willing? Yes. Even if it means testifying, going public with everything that happened? Especially then. Cordell nodded slowly. All right, here's what's going to happen. Come first light, Hayes and I are going to ride back and have a conversation with those men following you. Make it real clear that if they set 1 foot closer, they're going to jail. Meanwhile, you two are going to keep riding for Helena. When you get there, ask for Marshal Warren. Tell him everything. He'll take your statement and start building a case. Will that be enough? Mara asked. Depends on what else we find. But it's a start. Cordell turned to Rourke. You did the right thing coming to us. A lot of folks out here try to handle everything themselves, and it usually ends badly. I've been handling things myself for 3 years, Rourke said. Hasn't worked out so well. Then maybe it's time to try something different. Cordell and Hayes stayed until dawn, keeping watch while Mara and Rourke slept. When the sun rose, the two lawmen saddled their horses and prepared to ride south. You'll be safe from here, Cordell said. But don't let your guard down. Men like Tagert don't give up easy. Thank you, Mara said. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over and you're still alive. They rode off, and Mara and Rourke continued north toward Helena. Do you trust them? Mara asked after they'd been riding for an hour. I don't trust anyone, but I believe them. There's a difference? Trust is personal. Belief is practical. Rourke shifted in his saddle. Besides, we don't have much choice. We play the hand we're dealt. They reached Helena on the afternoon of the 3rd day. The town was bigger than Bitterage, real buildings made of brick and stone, streets crowded with wagons and people. It felt almost overwhelming after so many days in open country. Marshal Warren's office was near the center of town, a solid building with bars on the windows and a deputy standing guard outside. When they walked in, Warren himself looked up from a desk covered in paperwork. He was a big man, barrel-chested and gray-bearded, with eyes that had seen too much and a voice like gravel. "You Vance and Hale?" "Yes, sir," Rourke said. "Cordell sent word you were coming. Sit down and tell me everything." So they did. For the next 2 hours, Mara and Rourke laid out the whole story, from the day she arrived at the ranch to the barn burning to the men who followed them. Warren took notes, asked sharp questions, and didn't interrupt except to clarify details. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied them. "This Tagert, he's been a problem for a while, but he's smart, always stays just on the right side of the law, or close enough that nobody wants to take him on." Warren tapped his pencil on the desk. "What you're describing is arson, intimidation, attempted kidnapping. That's serious." "Will you arrest him?" Mara asked. "I will. But here's the thing. Arresting him and making charges stick are two different animals. He'll claim it was all a misunderstanding, that the barn fire was an accident, that he was just checking on your welfare, Miss Hale, because the town was concerned." Warren paused. "What I need is something that ties him directly to a crime, something he can't talk his way out of." "What about witnesses?" Rourke said. "His men won't testify against him. Too loyal or too scared. Then what do you suggest?" Warren thought for a moment. "I suggest you make yourself untouchable. Right now you're vulnerable because you're not married, Miss Hale. In the eyes of the law, you have no legal protection. You're a woman traveling with a man who's not your husband or family. That makes you fair game for anyone claiming moral concern." Mara felt her stomach drop. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if you were married, the law would see this differently. Tagert couldn't claim he was trying to rescue you. And any attack on you would be an attack on a man's wife. That's a whole different level of crime." Rourke went very still. "You're suggesting we get married. I'm suggesting you remove the legal ambiguity. Make it clear that Miss Hale has protection under the law." "That's insane," Mara said. "That's the frontier," Warren replied. "Insane is how we survive out here." Rourke stood abruptly. "Can we have a minute?" "Take all the time you need. But if you're going to do it today. I can have a judge perform the ceremony within the hour. Then Tagert's got nothing to stand on." Rourke walked out of the office and Mara followed him. They stood on the wooden sidewalk watching wagons roll past, neither of them speaking. Finally, Rourke said, "You don't have to do this. I know. It's not what either of us wanted. I know that too. But it might be the only way to stop them." Mara turned to face him. "Is that the only reason you're considering it?" Rourke looked at her, and for once, his expression was completely unguarded. "No, it's not." "Then what's the other reason?" "Because somewhere between you showing up at my door and now, I started caring whether you lived or died. And if marrying you is what it takes to keep you safe, then that's what I'll do." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even particularly romantic. But it was honest, and that mattered more. "Okay," Mara said. "Okay? Let's do it. Let's get married." Rourke exhaled hard. "You sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They went back inside and told Warren. He nodded, unsurprised, and sent his deputy to fetch a judge. Within 30 minutes, Judge Harriet Blackwell arrived, a severe-looking woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and no patience for nonsense. "This a shotgun wedding or a strategic one?" she asked bluntly. "Strategic," Rourke said. "Good. I don't do shotgun." Blackwell pulled out a worn book. "You got rings?" They didn't. "Witnesses?" Warren and his deputy stepped forward. "All right then. Let's make this quick. Do you, Rourke Vance, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Rourke looked at Mara. "I do." "And do you, Mara Hale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Mara's throat was tight, but her voice was steady. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you married. Sign here." They signed the certificate. Warren and the deputy signed as witnesses. Judge Blackwell stamped it official. And just like that, Mara Hale became Mara Vance. "Congratulations," Blackwell said dryly. "Try not to kill each other before the honeymoon's over. She left, and Warren handed Rourke the marriage certificate. Keep this safe. It's your proof. Now what? Rourke asked. Now I send word to Bitterage that any interference with the Vance household will be treated as a federal matter. That should make Tagert think twice. Warren stood and shook both their hands. You did good coming here. Not everyone has the guts to stand up to men like him. We didn't have a choice, Mara said. There's always a choice. You just made the right one. They left the marshal's office and walked back out into the afternoon sun. Mara felt strange, like she'd stepped sideways into someone else's life. She was married now, legally bound to a man she'd known for less than 2 months. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in years. We should find a place to stay tonight, Rourke said. Get some rest before we head back. Do you think it worked? The marriage? I think it bought us time. Whether it's enough. He trailed off. I guess we'll find out. They found a boarding house and paid for 2 rooms. The landlady gave them a knowing look when Rourke said they were married but wanted separate quarters, but she didn't comment, just handed over the keys and pointed them upstairs. Mara stood in her small room and stared at the marriage certificate. Her name, written in official ink, binding her to a man who carried ghosts like other people carried pocket watches. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Rourke stepped inside, looking as out of place in the civilized room as she felt. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. I'm married to a stranger. How all right can I be? We're not strangers anymore. No, I guess we're not. Mara set the certificate down. What happens now? We go home. We rebuild the barn. We keep living. And Tagert? We deal with him if he comes back. But we do it together. As a team. A married team. Yeah, a married team. Rourke hesitated. For what it's worth, I meant what I said earlier, about caring what happens to you. Mara crossed the small room and stood in front of him. I know you did, and for what it's worth, I care what happens to you too. They stood there for a moment, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Then Rourke stepped back. Get some rest. We leave at dawn. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Mara sat on the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. 3 days ago, she'd been a housekeeper on a failing ranch. Now she was a wife, a legal entity, a woman with protection under the law. It felt like winning and losing at the same time. But as she lay down and closed her eyes, one thought kept circling through her mind. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it by herself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The ride back to the ranch took 4 days instead of 3. Rourke insisted they take a different route, longer but less exposed, and Mara didn't argue. They were both exhausted, both wound tight with the knowledge that getting married had either solved their problem or made it infinitely worse. They didn't talk much during those 4 days, not because there was tension between them, but because words felt inadequate for what had happened. Marriage. The words sat between them like a third rider, present but unacknowledged. On the second night, camped near a stream, Mara finally broke the silence. Do you regret it? Rourke was checking the horses. He didn't turn around. Regret what? Marrying me. He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, no, but I regret that it had to happen this way. You deserved better than a courthouse ceremony with a judge who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. I didn't do it for romance, Rourke. I know, but still. He finally turned to face her. You're 23 years old. You should have had a real wedding, a real choice. I did have a choice. I chose this. Because you were backed into a corner. Maybe, but I still chose you. Mara wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill. And for what it's worth, I don't regret it either. Something shifted in Rourke's expression. Not quite relief, but close. We should talk about what happens when we get back, he said. What do you mean? I mean the practical stuff, where you sleep, how we present this to anyone who asks, what the rules are. Mara hadn't thought that far ahead. I guess I figured we'd just keep things the way they were. I'll stay in my room, you'll stay in yours. Oh, people are going to expect us to share a room. We're married now. People can expect whatever they want. We know the truth. Rourke sat down across from her, firelight catching the gray in his hair. The truth is, we got married to protect you. But if we don't at least look like a real married couple, it won't mean anything. Tagert will see through it. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we make it convincing. Not, he stopped, clearly uncomfortable. Not in the way you're thinking, but we should probably share a room. Make it look real. Mara's heart kicked up a notch. And you'd be okay with that? Would you? I don't know. Maybe. It depends on what the arrangement looks like. Separate beds, separate sides of the room. But if anyone comes by, they see what they expect to see. A married couple living like married couples do. It made sense. Mara hated that it made sense. All right, she said finally. But if you snore, I'm moving back to my old room. Rourke almost smiled. Fair enough. They sat in silence after that, listening to the creek burble over stones. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered across the sky like someone had thrown diamonds against black velvet. Mara pulled her blanket tighter and thought about what it meant to be married to someone you barely knew, but somehow trusted more than anyone. Can I ask you something? She said. Depends on what it is. When Sarah died, how long did it take before you could even think about living again? Rourke stared into the fire. I'm still working on that part. But you're trying. That's more than a lot of people would do. Trying doesn't mean succeeding. Most days I still feel like I'm going through the motions, like I'm playing a part in someone else's life. And the other days? He looked at her then, really looked at her. The other days I remember what it feels like to want tomorrow to come. Mara felt something tighten in her chest. What changed? You did. You showed up and refused to let me disappear into the grief, even when I was cruel about it, even when I gave you every reason to leave. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Maybe at first, but you stayed even after you had options. That means something. It means I'm stubborn. It means you're brave. There's a difference. Mara thought about that, about bravery versus stubbornness, about the fine line between surviving and living. I don't feel brave, she admitted. I feel terrified most of the time. Being scared doesn't make you a coward. Running away from the fear does. You've never run, not once. I ran from my old life. That's not running, that's escaping, completely different. They fell quiet again. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called out and another answered. The sound was lonely and wild and somehow perfect for this place. Rourke? Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on this. On us. On whatever this is becoming. He reached across the small space between them and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused from years of hard work, but his grip was gentle. I should be thanking you. You're the one doing all the heavy lifting here. We're doing it together. That's the whole point. They fell asleep like that, sitting by the fire, hands clasped, neither one willing to let go first. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with clouds sitting low on the horizon promising rain. They broke camp quickly, both of them eager to get home despite knowing what might be waiting there. The horses sensed their urgency and moved at a steady clip, eating up the miles. Around midday, they stopped to rest near a stand of cottonwoods. While the horses drank from a small creek, Mara noticed Rourke staring at something in the distance. What is it? She asked. Riders. 2 of them. Been following us for the last hour. Mara's stomach dropped. Tagert's men? Can't tell from here, but they're keeping their distance, which means they either don't want to be seen or they're waiting for something. Should we try to lose them? In open country like this, we'd never manage it. Better to keep moving and stay alert. They rode on, both of them constantly checking behind them. The riders stayed visible but distant, like shadows that wouldn't quite disappear. It set Mara's nerves on edge, made every sound seem threatening. By the time they made camp that night, her hands were shaking from tension. Rourke noticed and handed her a cup of coffee he'd brewed over their small fire. Drink, it'll help. Will it make mysterious riders disappear? No, but it'll warm you up, and that's something. Mara sipped the bitter liquid and tried to steady her breathing. What do you think they want? To scare us, to make us jumpy, to prove they can reach us anytime they want. It's working. I know, but we can't let them see that. Rourke sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Fear is a weapon. If we show it, they've already won. How do you not show it when you're terrified? You fake it. You put on a mask and you wear it until it becomes real. Is that what you've been doing all this time? He was quiet for a moment. At first, yeah, after Sarah and Lily died, I wore that mask so long I forgot what my real face looked like. But lately, he trailed off. Lately what? Lately I've been remembering, little pieces at a time, like finding parts of yourself you thought were lost forever. Mara set down her coffee and turned to face him. I'm glad. You deserve to be more than your grief. So do you. I'm not grieving anyone. Aren't you? You lost your parents, your home, every plan you ever had for your life. That's worth grieving. Mara had never thought of it that way. I guess I've been too busy surviving to mourn properly. Survival and mourning aren't exclusive. Sometimes you have to do both at once. Is that what we're doing? I think so. We're surviving together and mourning what we lost and trying to build something new all at the same time. It's messy and complicated and probably doomed to fail, but we're doing it anyway. You're really not good at inspirational speeches. Rourke laughed, that rare, genuine sound that Mara was starting to treasure. Never claimed to be. They took turns keeping watch that night. When it was Mara's shift, she sat with the shotgun across her knees and watched the darkness for movement. The riders had made camp maybe half a mile away. She could see their fire flickering like a distant star. Around midnight, Rourke woke and came to sit beside her. You should be sleeping, she said. Can't. Too wired. Me too. They sat together in the quiet, both of them staring out at the vast emptiness of the prairie. After a while, Rourke spoke. When we get back, things are going to be different. Different how? We're going to have to be smarter, more careful. Tagert's not going to let this go, and the marriage certificate is just paper. It won't stop him if he really wants to come after us. So what do? We document everything, every threat, every incident, every interaction. We build a case so solid that even if something happens to us, the law will have to act. You're talking like we might not survive this. I'm talking like we need to be prepared for every possibility. Mara pulled her knees to her chest. I don't want to live like that, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't either. But right now, caution is what keeps us breathing. There has to be a middle ground between reckless and paranoid. When you find it, let me know. Despite the gravity of the conversation, Mara smiled. You know what I think? What? I think you've been alone so long you've forgotten how to share the burden. You're trying to carry everything yourself, and it's killing you. Rourke didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was rough. I couldn't protect them. Sarah and Lily. I was supposed to keep them safe, and I failed. If I can't even carry the weight of planning and worrying, then what good am I? You're not supposed to do it alone. That's the whole point of being married, sharing the load, sharing the fear and the planning and the weight of it all. I don't know how to do that. Then learn. I'm learning too. We'll figure it out together. He reached over and took her hand again, and they sat like that until the sun started to rise, two people trying to remember how to trust, how to hope, how to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. They reached the ranch on the fourth day, just as the sun was setting. The burned remains of the barn stood like a monument to everything that had gone wrong, but the house was still standing, still waiting. Mara slid down from her horse and stood in the yard, looking at the place with new eyes. It was hers now, legally, in ways it hadn't been before. Welcome home, Mrs. Vance, Rourke said quietly. The name still sounded strange, but not wrong. They spent the evening settling back in, putting away supplies, checking that everything was still secure. The chickens had managed to survive without them, though they were pissy about the lack of regular feeding. The garden was even more dead than before, but the house itself was untouched. That night they moved Mara's things into Rourke's room. It was awkward and careful, him clearing out half the dresser, her trying not to look at the bed where his wife had once slept. They set up a partition using an old blanket hung from the ceiling, dividing the room into two spaces. This work? Rourke asked. Mara looked at the makeshift wall. It was ridiculous, but it was also sweet in a way she hadn't expected. Yeah, this works. They settled into their separate sides, and for a while, there was just silence. Mara lay on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to Rourke move around on the other side of the blanket. It felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical closeness. just the knowledge that they were sharing space, sharing air, sharing this strange new life they'd built. Mara? Rourke's voice came through the partition. Yeah? Thank you for not running when you had the chance. Where would I run to? Anywhere. Anywhere that wasn't here. Mara rolled onto her side, facing the blanket. Maybe I didn't want to be anywhere else. She heard him shift, heard the creak of his bed frame. Why not? Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I matter. Like what I do makes a difference. Like I'm not just disposable. The silence that followed was heavy. Then, you were never disposable, Mara. The world was just too blind to see it. You saw it. Eventually, took me longer than it should have. But you got there. That's what counts. More silence. Then Rourke spoke again, his voice softer. I don't know how to do this. How to be married to someone who's not Sarah. How to open up that part of myself again. Neither do I. I've never been married to anyone. So we're both fumbling in the dark. Pretty much, but at least we're fumbling together. She heard him laugh quietly. That's one way to look at it. It's the only way that makes sense to me. They fell quiet after that, and eventually Mara drifted off to sleep, lulled by the sound of Rourke's breathing and the knowledge that she wasn't alone. The next morning, they started rebuilding. Not the barn. That would take time and money they didn't have yet. But they started fixing the smaller things. The chicken coop fence, the vegetable garden, the loose boards on the porch. It was hard work, made harder by the fact that neither of them mentioned the elephant in the room. They were waiting for Tagert to make his move. 3 days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. Nothing happened. No riders on the horizon, no threats, no fires in the night. It was almost worse than the attacks. At least with violence, you knew where you stood. Maybe Warren scared them off, Mara said one evening while they were repairing the garden fence. Rourke hammered in another post. Maybe, or maybe they're just regrouping. You ever think about just accepting good news when it comes? Can't afford to. Out here, good news usually means you're about to get blindsided. Mara sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. That's a depressing way to live. It's a realistic way to live. There's that word again, realistic. She tossed a rock at him, missing by a foot. You know what I think? I think you use realism as an excuse not to hope for anything. Rourke stopped working and looked at her. Hope gets you killed. So does despair. At least hope gives you something to fight for. They stared at each other across the half-finished fence, and Mara realized they weren't really talking about Tagert anymore. Sarah used to say something similar, Rourke said finally. She'd tell me I was too cautious, too afraid to believe things could get better. Was she right? She was always right. I just didn't want to admit it. And now? Rourke picked up another post. Now I'm trying to figure out if you're right too. It was the closest thing to optimism Mara had ever heard from him. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, working until noon, resting during the hottest part of the day, then working again until sunset. They talked more now, about small things at first, then gradually about bigger ones. Rourke told her stories about growing up in Missouri, about how he'd come west looking for adventure and found hardship instead. Mara told him about her childhood, about her mother's gentle hands and her father's quiet strength. The blanket partition came down on a Tuesday. Neither of them discussed it. Rourke just took it down one morning while Mara was making breakfast, and when she came back to the room, it was folded in the corner. That night, they shared the bed properly for the first time, not touching it first, both of them lying rigid on their respective sides. Then Mara felt Rourke's hand find hers in the dark. You still awake? He asked. Yeah. I keep thinking about Sarah, about how she'd react to all this. Mara tensed slightly. And? I think she'd like you. You've got the same fire she had, the same refusal to back down. He was quiet for a moment. For a long time, I thought loving someone again would be a betrayal, like I was trying to replace them. I'm not trying to replace anyone, Rourke. I know, that's why it works. He rolled toward her. Sarah and Lily, they'll always be part of me, part of this place. But you're teaching me that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It just means there's room for more than grief. Mara turned to face him, close enough to see his eyes in the moonlight coming through the window. I'm scared. Of what? Of losing this. Of finally having something good and watching it burn down like everything else. Rourke touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. Then we fight like hell to protect it. Together. She kissed him then, and this time it wasn't careful or tentative. It was fierce and real and full of all the things they'd been too afraid to say out loud. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Rourke rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I didn't think I'd ever say that to anyone again, but I love you, Mara. Her throat tightened. I love you too, even though you're stubborn and pessimistic and you snore. He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound filled something in Mara she hadn't known was empty. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in months, Mara didn't dream of running. That night, lying in Rourke's arms, Mara heard the music box again. The same lullaby, playing soft and slow from somewhere in the room. She opened her eyes and saw it sitting on the dresser, the one Rourke had kept hidden away for so long. You brought it out, she whispered. Seemed like the right time. Lily loved that song. Sarah would wind it up every night before bed. His voice was thick with emotion. I wanted them to be part of this. Part of us. Mara pressed closer to him. They are. They always were. The music played on, filling the room with its bittersweet melody, and Mara understood something fundamental. Love didn't replace love. It just expanded to make room for more. Rourke's heart had space for both his lost family and his new one. And maybe hers did too. The trouble came 2 weeks before the trial. Mara was in the garden, trying to coax late-season vegetables from the stubborn soil when she heard horses. Multiple riders, coming fast. Her stomach dropped. Rourke! He was already running from the barn, rifle in hand. But when the riders came into view, Mara saw something that made her freeze. It wasn't Tagert's men. It was Marshal Warren, Deputy Cordell, and 3 other lawmen she didn't recognize. They pulled up in the yard and Warren dismounted with an expression that made Mara's blood run cold. What happened? Rourke demanded. Tagert made bail 2 days ago. Last night, he and 4 of his men tried to skip town. We caught them 10 miles outside Bitterage with enough cash and supplies for a long trip. So you've got him, Mara said, relief flooding through her. We had him. This morning, while we were transporting him back to jail, his men ambushed us. Killed Deputy Hayes, wounded another man. Tagert got away. The world tilted. He's running? Rourke's voice was deadly calm. He was, but we tracked him to the ridgeline about 5 miles from here. He's holed up in an old line shack with at least 3 men, and based on what he was shouting before we pulled back, he's planning to come for you both before he leaves the territory. Let him try, Rourke said flatly. That's not how this works. We're going to end this today, but I need you both somewhere safe while we do it. Safe where? If we leave, he'll just burn this place to the ground. Warren's jaw tightened. Then we make our stand here, but I need you to understand this could get ugly. Tagert's got nothing to lose now. He knows he's going to hang if we catch him. That makes him dangerous. Mara stepped forward. What do you need us to do? Stay in the house. Barricade the doors and windows. If shooting starts, you get down and stay down. We'll handle Tagert. And if you can't, Rourke asked, then you do what you have to do to survive. They spent the next hour preparing. Warren and his men took positions around the property, 2 in the barn, 2 behind the well, 1 in the tree line. Rourke and Mara barricaded the house, moving furniture against doors, hanging blankets over windows to hide their movements. This is insane, Mara said as she shoved the kitchen table against the back door. This is the frontier. Insane is standard. Rourke checked his rifle for the 3rd time. You remember how to use the shotgun? Point and shoot, hard to forget. If they get inside, you aim for center mass. Don't hesitate, don't warn them, just shoot. Rourke, promise me, Mara. If it comes down to you or them, you choose you. She looked at him, this man who'd lost everything once and was terrified of losing it again. I promise, but it's not going to come to that. You don't know that. No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. You should try it sometime. He almost smiled. You're a terrible influence. You love me anyway. Yeah, I really do. They finished the barricades and waited. Rourke positioned himself near the front window where he had a clear view of the yard. Mara took the back, shotgun heavy in her hands. The house felt like a coffin, dark and stuffy and wrong. Talk to me, Mara said after 10 minutes of oppressive silence. Tell me something, anything. Rourke didn't turn from the window. Like what? Like what you're thinking right now. I'm thinking that if I survive this, I'm going to take you somewhere nice, somewhere that isn't Montana. Where? San Francisco, maybe, or Denver, somewhere with hotels and restaurants and people who don't try to kill you. That sounds expensive. We'll figure it out. Maybe sell some cattle, take out a loan. I don't care. I just want you to see something beautiful for once. Mara's throat tightened. You think this place isn't beautiful? This place is hard and mean, and it takes everything from you. That's not beautiful. I disagree. I think beautiful things are the ones that survive despite everything trying to destroy them. Like us. Rourke finally turned to look at her. When did you become such an optimist? When I realized pessimism was just another word for giving up, and I'm done giving up. Before he could respond, Warren whistled from outside. The signal. Riders were coming. Mara moved to the front window and peered through a crack in the blanket. 6 men on horseback, riding slow and deliberate. Tagert was in front, and even from this distance she could see the rage on his face. They stopped about 50 yards from the house. Vance, Tagert's voice carried across the yard. I know you're in there. You and your whore wife. Rourke's hand tightened on his rifle, but he didn't respond. I'm giving you one chance. Send the woman out, and I'll let you live. Keep her, and I burn this place down with both of you inside. Still no response. Tagert laughed, ugly and mean. You really think hiding behind the law is going to save you? The law can't protect you out here. Nothing can. Warren stepped out from behind the well, rifle raised. Robert Tagert, you're under arrest for the murder of Deputy James Hayes and for attempted escape. Dismount and put your hands up. Tagert's men spread out, hands moving to their weapons. That's not going to happen, Marshal. Then you're going to die here. Maybe, but I'm taking them with me. Everything happened at once. One of Tagert's men drew his pistol. Warren fired, and the man went down. Then everyone was shooting, the air filling with gunfire and smoke and shouting. Mara hit the floor, pulling Rourke down with her as bullets punched through the walls. Stay low, Rourke shouted over the chaos. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. Mara could hear men screaming, horses shrieking, the crack of rifles, and the deeper boom of shotguns. She pressed herself against the floor and prayed, not to any particular deity, just to the universe itself, that they would survive this. When the shooting finally stopped, Mara's ears were ringing and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the shotgun. Rourke moved to the window, peering out carefully. What's happening? Mara whispered. 3 of Tagert's men are down, the others scattered. Warren's men are going after them. And Tagert? Rourke's expression went dark. Gone. Must have slipped away during the fight. A new sound cut through the aftermath, crackling. Mara smelled it before she saw it. Smoke. He set the barn on fire, Rourke said. Son of a bitch set the barn on fire. They ran outside. The barn, what they'd managed to rebuild over the past weeks, was already engulfed. Not the old burned structure, but the new one they'd started. Their work. Their future. And standing on the ridge beyond it was Tagert, watching. Something in Mara snapped. She grabbed the shotgun and started running toward him. Mara, no! But she was already moving, climbing the ridge, rage propelling her forward. She didn't have a plan. Didn't have anything except fury and the absolute certainty that she was done running, done hiding, done letting this man take things from her. Tagert saw her coming and laughed. Well, look at this. The little whore's got some fight in her after all. Mara raised the shotgun. Get off our land. Your land? This is nothing. This whole place is nothing, and so are you. Maybe, but I'm still standing, and you're about to hang. So who's really nothing here? Tagert's smile faltered. You think you've won? You think because you married that broken-down rancher and cried to the marshal that you're safe? I'll always be out here. Men like me, we don't go away. You're right, Mara said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Men like you don't go away. But women like me don't back down, and that's the difference. She saw his hand move toward his gun and didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The shotgun kicked hard against her shoulder. The blast took Tagert in the chest, and he went down like a puppet with cut strings. Mara stood there, shotgun still raised, watching him bleed out on the ground. She felt Rourke come up beside her, felt his hand on her shoulder. "Is he dead?" she asked, voice shaking. Rourke checked. "Yeah, he's dead." Mara lowered the shotgun. Her hands were steady now. "I killed him." "You defended yourself. There's a difference." Warren arrived breathing hard from the climb. He looked at Tagert's body, then at Mara. "What happened?" "He came at us," Rourke said before Mara could speak. "She defended our property. It was a clean shoot." Warren studied them both for a long moment. Then he nodded. "That's what I'll put in my report. Self-defense on your own land, justifiable." They walked back down to the ranch together. The barn was still burning, but Warren's men had managed to save the house. 2 of Tagert's men were in custody. The other 2 were dead. It was over. It was finally over. That night, after the marshals had left and taken the bodies with them, Mara and Rourke sat on the porch and watched the barn burn down to nothing. "We'll rebuild it," Rourke said quietly. "I know. It'll take time. Money we don't have yet, but we'll do it." Mara leaned against him. "I killed a man today." "I know. I don't feel guilty. Is that wrong?" "No. It means you're a survivor." He put his arm around her. "Sarah asked me once what I thought the frontier was really about. I said land, opportunity, freedom. She said I was wrong. She said the frontier was about finding out who you really are when everything else gets stripped away. When there's no one to tell you how to act or who to be, just you and the choices you make." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't want to find out. I was scared of what I might see." He looked at Mara. "But you're not scared. You looked at who you are and you accepted it. That takes more courage than anything." "I'm terrified all the time, Rourke. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. You taught me that." They sat in silence, watching the embers float up into the night sky like dying stars. Mara thought about what she'd done, about the weight of taking a life, about how it should feel worse than it did. But all she felt was relief and exhaustion, and the fierce protective love for this place and this man that had driven her up that ridge in the first place. "I don't regret it," she said finally. "Killing him. He would have kept coming, would have destroyed everything we built." "I know." "Does that make me a bad person?" "No. It makes you someone who chose to protect what matters. There's nothing bad about that." The fire burned itself out around midnight, leaving nothing but ash and twisted metal. They went inside and fell into bed, neither of them bothering to undress. They just held each other in the dark, too wrung out for anything else. "Mara?" Rourke's voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah? Thank you for fighting for us. Always." The trial never happened. With Tagert dead and his men either in custody or fled, there was no one left to prosecute. Warren closed the case and sent word that the Vances were free to live their lives without looking over their shoulders. It should have felt like victory, and it did. But it also felt like loss, the loss of the people they'd been before all this started. Neither of them would ever be that innocent again. The rebuilding started the next week. Neighbors Mara hadn't known existed started showing up, ranchers from 20, 30 miles away who'd heard what happened and wanted to help. They brought lumber, nails, muscle, and stories. Turned out Tagert had been terrorizing people for years, and now that he was gone, they felt safe enough to be decent to each other. A man named Jacob Hendricks rode in first, a Swedish immigrant with hands like bear paws, and a smile that showed 3 missing teeth. He brought his 2 sons, strapping young men in their 20s, and enough timber to frame half a barn. "Heard what you did," he said to Mara, not a trace of judgment in his voice. "About time someone stood up to that bastard. Been stealing cattle from my land for 2 years. Sheriff wouldn't do nothing about it." Behind him came the Chens, a Chinese couple who'd been run off 2 different claims before settling 30 miles north. Mr. Chen spoke little English, but his wife translated as they unloaded tools and offered their labor. "We know what it's like," Mrs. Chen said quietly, her eyes meeting Mara's with understanding. "To be unwanted, to have to fight for everything." The McCready family arrived next, Irish homesteaders with 6 red-headed children who ran wild through the property like a pack of wolves. Mrs. McCready, round-faced and perpetually flushed, thrust a basket of bread into Mara's hands. "For keeping that devil from hurting anyone else," she said in a thick brogue. "My daughter, he tried to corner her in town last spring. She was only 14. Even old widow Patterson showed up, driven in a wagon by her granddaughter Emma. She was nearly 80, spine bent with age, but her eyes were sharp as she surveyed the burned barn. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," she declared, setting another basket on Mara's kitchen table. "You did what needed doing, and anyone who says different can answer to me. That man tried to buy my land for a fraction of its worth, then threatened to burn me out when I refused. Would have done it too if he'd lived." More came after that. The Steiners, German farmers with precision in their movements and kindness in their eyes. The Rodriguezes, a Mexican family who'd fled violence south of the border only to find more prejudice here. The Johnsons, freed slaves working their way north to Canada, but stopping to help because nobody should have to face this alone. Within days, the property was swarming with activity. Men framed the new barn while women cooked enormous meals to feed everyone. Children played together, breaking down barriers of language and culture with the ease that only the young possess. At night, they gathered around fires and shared stories of hardship, of loss, of the small victories that made survival worthwhile. Mara moved through it all in a daze, overwhelmed by the generosity of strangers who'd become neighbors, who'd become friends. "I don't know how to thank them," she told Rourke one evening as they watched the sun set over a yard full of activity. "You already did. You gave them permission to be brave, to stand up instead of hiding." "I didn't give them anything. I just did what I had to do." "Exactly. And they saw it. Saw that one person could make a difference." Within a month, the new barn was half finished, already larger than the old one, with proper ventilation and a loft that could store twice as much hay. Jakob and his sons had taken charge of the construction, their Swedish precision evident in every straight line and solid joint. "We build it right," Jacob said when Rourke tried to thank him. "Build it to last, like you and your wife. Built to last." By the end of the second month, the barn was complete. Bigger and better than before, with stalls for 6 horses, space for equipment, and a tack room that actually kept the leather dry. They celebrated with a barn dance, the first real gathering the community had ever had. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else had an accordion. The music was rough but joyful, and people danced until their feet ached. Mara found herself passed from partner to partner, Jacob spinning her with surprising grace, Mr. Chen bowing formally, young Thomas Macready stepping on her toes with teenage enthusiasm. But it was Rourke who held her as the night wound down, swaying slowly to a melody that had no words. "Look at what you built," he murmured against her hair. "We built. No, this is yours. These people came for you because you showed them it was possible." Mara looked around at the faces illuminated by lantern light. People who'd been strangers a month ago, now laughing and dancing together like family. "I think we all built it. We just needed a reason to stop being afraid." The barn stood as more than just a building. It became a symbol, proof that communities could form anywhere, even in the hardest places, as long as people were willing to reach out. But the real work was just beginning. Autumn came in gold and crimson, painting the prairie in colors Mara hadn't known existed here. The work never stopped. There was always something to fix, something to tend, something that needed doing. But it felt different now. Less like survival and more like living. Mara planted a new garden in late August, knowing most things wouldn't grow before winter hit, but needing to put something living in the ground anyway. She worked the soil with her hands, feeling the earth respond to her touch. Some seeds she planted for practicality, potatoes, onions, carrots that would store through winter. But she also planted flowers along the fence line, wildflower seeds she'd bought from a traveling peddler. "Those won't survive the frost," Rourke observed, watching her work. "Maybe not, but I'm planting them anyway." "Why?" "Because we need beauty, not just survival. Because I want to prove something can bloom here besides hardship." The wildflowers bloomed in September, a riot of color against the brown grass. They were foolish and impractical and absolutely beautiful, and when Mara saw them swaying in the wind, she cried. "Why are you crying?" Rourke asked, finding her in the garden with tears streaming down her face. "Because they're alive. Because we made something beautiful in this hard place." Because my mother used to grow flowers in the city, in this tiny plot behind our boarding house, and I thought I'd never have that again. He knelt beside her and took her dirt-stained hands in his. Tell me about her. Your mother. So Mara did. She told him about how her mother had kept that garden alive against all odds, how she'd spend hours there with young Mara, teaching her the names of plants and the patience required to make things grow. She used to say that gardens were proof of hope, Mara said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, that as long as you could make something grow, you hadn't given up on tomorrow. She sounds like she would have liked it here. She would have hated it, too isolated, too hard, but she would have made it work anyway, because that's who she was. Stubborn and practical, and so full of love it hurt sometimes. Like you. Yeah, like me. That night they lay in bed and Mara told him more stories. About her father, quiet and steady, who'd worked himself to death trying to provide for them. About the boarding house where they'd lived, full of transient souls passing through. About the loneliness of being a child in a world of adults, always trying to be useful enough to justify her existence. I learned early that if I wasn't useful, I wasn't wanted, she said. That's why it was so hard when you pushed me away at first. It confirmed everything I'd always believed about myself. Rourke pulled her closer. And now? Now I know I was wrong. I'm wanted because I'm me, not because of what I can do. You taught me that. We taught each other. The next morning, Rourke took her to the eastern ridge where he'd placed the headstones for Sarah and Lily. Mara had asked to see them weeks ago, but he'd waited, wanting the right moment. The grave markers were simple, 2 pieces of slate with names carved deep and careful. Sarah Vance, 1831 to 1873, beloved wife and mother. Lily Vance, 1867 to 1873, taken too soon, forever loved. Mara knelt and touched Sarah's stone, running her fingers over the carved letters. I'll take care of him, she whispered. I promise. And I'll make sure Lily's memory lives on, that she's not forgotten. Beside her, Rourke stood with his hat in his hands, looking down at the graves of his first family. His face was tight with emotion, but not broken like it used to be, just sad in a way that was honest and clean. I used to come here every day, he said, just to sit and talk to them, to apologize for not being there when it mattered, to promise I'd never forget them. Do you still feel like you need to apologize? No, not anymore. I understand now that I can't change what happened, can only change what I do next. Do you think they'd approve? Of us? Rourke considered this seriously. Sarah was practical above all else. She'd want me to be happy, to keep living. And Lily, his voice caught. Lily would have loved you, would have followed you around asking a million questions, wanting to help with everything. Mara's throat tightened. I wish I could have known them. In a way you do. They're part of what made me who I am, part of what made this place what it is. Their love didn't end when they died, it just changed form. They stayed until the sun was high overhead, Mara paying her respects to the family that had come before her. She didn't feel jealous or threatened by their memory. Instead, she felt connected to them, 2 women who'd loved the same complicated man, separated by death, but united in purpose. Thank you for bringing me here, she said as they rode back. Thank you for understanding why I needed to. The weeks turned into months. The work continued, always more to do, always something demanding attention. Rourke taught Mara to ride properly, not just hanging on for dear life, but actually controlling the horse. She learned to read the weather, to predict storms by the way the animals behaved, to navigate by stars when the prairie stretched endless in all directions. He taught her to shoot more accurately, to track game, to skin and butcher what they killed. Practical skills for frontier life, but also his way of showing he trusted her to survive. Mara taught him to cook more than just stew and biscuits. She worked through a recipe book she'd bought with their first profit from selling cattle, experimenting with dishes that sometimes succeeded and often failed spectacularly. What is this? Rourke asked one night, poking suspiciously at something that might have been chicken. Coq au vin, or my attempt at it. It's interesting. It's terrible, I know. Mara started laughing. I forgot the wine, added too much salt, and I think I burned the bottom. It's not that bad. You're a terrible liar. They ended up eating bread and cheese that night, laughing about the disaster on the stove. These small moments of normalcy felt precious after everything they'd survived. The ability to fail at something without it meaning life or death. The luxury of laughter. They fought sometimes. Stupid arguments about whether to plant wheat or barley in the spring, whether to buy new chickens or repair the old coop. Once they didn't speak for 2 whole days after Rourke suggested selling off the far pasture, and Mara accused him of giving up. "I'm not giving up," he'd said, voice tight with frustration. "I'm being practical. That land's too far to work effectively." Practical is just another word for quitting before you've really tried. And stubborn is another word for refusing to see reality. Maybe I like my version of reality better than yours. They'd gone to bed angry that night, lying on opposite sides of the mattress like strangers. But in the morning, Rourke had brought her coffee and sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're right. We should try to make it work before we give up. I'm sorry, too, for calling you a quitter. You're the opposite of that. We're both stubborn as hell." "Yeah, but at least we're stubborn together." They always came back to each other, always apologized, always worked it out. Because the alternative, losing what they'd built together, was unthinkable. Winter arrived early that year, with snow falling in late October and not stopping until April. They were isolated for weeks at a time, cut off from neighbors by drifts that reached past the windows. But the house was warm, the pantry was full, and they had each other. They spent the long dark evenings reading by lamplight, books borrowed from Widow Patterson's surprisingly extensive library. Mara discovered a love for poetry she'd never known she had. Rourke admitted he'd always wanted to learn to draw and started sketching the view from their window, trying to capture the way snow transformed the landscape. They played cards, endless games of poker where the stakes were chores or privileges. Mara got good at reading Rourke's tells, the tiny flicker of his eyes when he had a strong hand. "You're cheating," he accused after she won 5 hands in a row. "I'm observant. There's a difference." "You're counting cards." "That's not cheating. That's strategy." He threw his cards down in mock disgust, but he was smiling. "Remind me never to gamble with you for real money. You don't have real money." Exactly my point. They talked about everything and nothing. Rourke told her stories about his childhood in Missouri, fishing with his father in the summer, hunting with his grandfather in the fall, learning to read by candlelight because books were precious and rare. "My father wanted me to be a lawyer," he said one night while snow battered the windows. "Said I had the mind for it, the way I could argue any position. But I wanted adventure, wanted to see what was past the horizon." Do you regret it? Choosing this instead?" "I regret losing Sarah and Lily, but I don't regret coming west. This place, it strips everything fake away, shows you who you really are." "And who are you?" He thought about it. "Someone who survived, someone who learned to hope again, someone who's trying to be worthy of the second chance he got." Mara told him about her years in the boarding house, about the parade of characters who'd passed through, the actors and gamblers, the prospectors and preachers, the women escaping bad marriages, and the men running from worse pasts. "I learned to read people there," she said, "to figure out in the first 5 minutes whether someone was dangerous or just damaged, whether they'd caused trouble or just needed a safe place to rest." "Is that what you saw in me when you first arrived?" "I saw someone damaged who might be dangerous, but also someone who was fighting to stay decent despite everything trying to make him cruel." "And you decided I was worth the risk?" "I decided we were both worth the risk." On Christmas Eve, Rourke gave Mara a present, a small wooden box he'd carved during the long winter evenings. The lid was decorated with a pattern of wildflowers, each petal carved with painstaking detail. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. "It's not much," he said, looking almost shy. "But I wanted you to have something that was yours, not something left over from before. Something new." Mara opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside was a tiny photograph of the two of them, taken in Helena by a traveling photographer. They looked serious in the picture, almost stern. But their hands were clasped together, visible even in the small frame, and that told the real story. "It's perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Help me put it on?" He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. Mara touched the locket, feeling its weight settle against her heart. "I have something for you too," she said. She handed him a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a framed photograph, the one of Sarah and Lily that he'd kept hidden away for so long. I had it properly framed in town, Mara explained. I thought it should be on the mantel, where it belongs, where they belong. Rourke stared at the photograph, his eyes filling with tears. You did this for me? For us, for them. Because they're part of our story, and they should be honored, not hidden. He set the frame on the mantel with shaking hands, positioning it carefully. Sarah and Lily smiled out at the room, frozen in a moment of happiness that death couldn't erase. Thank you, Rourke said, his voice rough, for understanding, for making space for all of us. They stood together, looking at the photograph, and Mara felt something settle into place. This wasn't about competing with the past. It was about honoring it while building the future. That night, lying in bed with the wind howling outside, Mara felt Rourke's hand rest on her stomach. What? She asked. Nothing. Just thinking. About what? About the future. What it might look like, a few years from now. Mara understood what he wasn't saying. They'd been married nearly a year now. It was natural to think about children, but she also knew the fear that came with that thought. For him, the memory of losing Lily, and for her, the terror of childbirth in a place where doctors were scarce and help was far away. Are you asking if I want children? She said quietly. Only if you do. I know it's asking a lot. Out here it's dangerous, and after everything, I want it, Mara interrupted. I want all of it. The mess and the noise and the chaos. I want a life so full we can't remember what empty felt like. Even knowing the risks? Especially knowing the risks, because the alternative is living in fear, and I'm done with that. We survived Tagert. We survived everything this place threw at us. We can survive this too. Rourke pulled her close. What did I do to deserve you? You opened your door. That was enough. In February, the snow finally broke. A week of warm winds, Chinook winds, Jacob called them, melted the drifts and turned the prairie into a sea of mud. Within days, the brown grass started showing through. Within weeks, tiny shoots of green appeared, stubborn life pushing through frozen ground. And Mara realized she was pregnant. She knew before her body showed any real signs, just a feeling, a certainty that something had changed. She waited another week to be sure, watching for the monthly bleeding that didn't come. When it still hadn't arrived by the end of the month, she told Rourke. They were mending fence on the south pasture when she said it. I'm pregnant. Rourke's hand stilled on the wire he was stringing. He turned to look at her, his face going through a dozen emotions in as many seconds. Fear, joy, terror, hope. You're sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor. I've missed 2 cycles. I've been sick in the mornings. And I just know. When? October, I think. Maybe early November. Rourke dropped the wire and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. She felt him shaking, felt dampness against her neck where his face pressed against her skin. I'm terrified, he admitted, voice muffled. Me too. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't protect you? What if... Stop. We can't think like that. We can only do what we can do. Be careful. Be prepared. And have faith that we're strong enough to handle whatever comes. He pulled back to look at her face, searching for doubt and finding only determination. You're not scared? I'm terrified. But I'm not letting fear stop me from living. Not anymore. When did you get so brave? The day I decided to stay here instead of running. You were there, you should remember. He laughed, shaky but genuine, and kissed her. We're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby. They told the neighbors at the next community gathering, a spring planting festival that Jacob had organized. The response was overwhelming. Mrs. Chen immediately began planning, listing off herbs and teas that would help with morning sickness. Mrs. McCready offered to stay with them when the time came, having delivered 6 of her own and helped with countless others. Even Widow Patterson got involved, pulling Mara aside with advice both practical and strange. Keep your belly warm, but not too warm. Walk every day, but don't overdo it. And for heaven's sake, don't reach over your head after the 6th month. It'll tangle the cord. Mara wasn't sure how much of it was wisdom and how much was superstition, but she appreciated the concern. These people had become her family, and they were rallying around her the way families should. Jacob started building a cradle, an elaborate affair with carved animals marching along the sides. "For the little one," he said, when Rourke tried to pay him. "No charge. Is gift." The Rodriguez women brought baby clothes they'd sewn by hand, tiny garments in soft fabrics. Mr. Chen carved a set of wooden toys, a horse, a cow, a chicken, each one smoothed to perfection so there were no splinters. Mara was overwhelmed by the generosity. "I don't know how to thank everyone." "You already did," Mrs. Chen said. "You gave us a community, a place where we belong. This is just us giving back." The pregnancy was harder than Mara expected. She was sick constantly for the first 4 months, could barely keep food down, and lost weight instead of gaining it. Rourke worried himself nearly sick, hovering over her like she might disappear if he looked away. "I'm fine," she kept telling him. "You're not fine. You can't keep anything down." "It'll pass. Mrs. McCready said it usually does around the 4th month. And if it doesn't, then we'll deal with it, together." But it did pass, eventually. By late June, the sickness faded and Mara's appetite returned with a vengeance. She ate everything in sight: bread and butter, eggs and bacon, vegetables from the garden that was finally producing. Rourke joked that they'd need to buy more chickens just to keep up with her egg consumption. "I'm eating for 2, she reminded him. "You're eating for 4. Just wait until the baby comes, then you'll really see appetite." By July, her belly had started to show, a small swell that made her dresses tight. By August, there was no hiding it. She was visibly pregnant, and the reality of it hit her in waves. Sometimes with joy, sometimes with terror, always with the overwhelming sense that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. Rourke became impossibly protective. He wouldn't let her lift anything heavy, wouldn't let her ride the horses, barely let her walk to the well without supervision. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she protested. "I know, but I can't lose you, Mara. I wouldn't survive it." "You won't lose me. I'm too stubborn to die." Sarah was stubborn too. "Then I'll be more stubborn. I'll be so stubborn that death itself gets tired of arguing with me." Despite his fears, Rourke also showed moments of pure joy. He'd rest his hand on her belly and feel the baby kick, his face lighting up with wonder. He'd talk to the baby, telling it stories about the ranch, about the horses, about all the things they'd do together. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" Mara asked one evening. "Doesn't matter, as long as they're healthy." "But if you had to guess?" "A girl. As stubborn as her mother, probably. She'll run us ragged." "What if it's a boy?" "Then he'll be as stubborn as his mother and run us ragged anyway." They prepared through the fall. Rourke finished the nursery, the room that used to be Mara's before they'd married, now transformed into a space for the baby. He painted the walls a soft cream, built shelves for the toys and clothes that kept arriving, positioned Jacob's cradle near the window where morning light would stream in. Mara sewed blankets and tiny nightgowns, her stitches getting better with practice. She was no seamstress, but what she made was functional and filled with love. Mrs. Chen taught her about herbs, which ones would help with labor pain, which ones would help with milk production, which ones to avoid entirely. Mrs. McCready drilled her on what to expect during birth, holding nothing back about the pain and difficulty, but also the incredible reward at the end. "It's the hardest thing you'll ever do," she said bluntly, "but also the most worthwhile. And you're strong. You'll manage." The baby came on a freezing night in late October, 2 weeks early and in the middle of a blizzard. Mara's water broke while she was making dinner. She looked down at the puddle on the kitchen floor and felt a jolt of fear and excitement. "Rourke, it's time." He went pale. "But it's too early. And the midwife. The midwife's in town. That's a 2-hour ride in good weather, and this is a blizzard. You need to get Mrs. McCready." "That's an hour each way." "Then you better ride fast." But even Mrs. McCready couldn't make it through the storm. The snow was coming down too thick, the wind too fierce. After an hour, Rourke came back alone, snow-covered and frantic. "The drifts are too deep. The horse can't get through." Mara felt the first real contraction hit, a wave of pain that took her breath away. When it passed, she looked at Rourke with forced calm. "Then it's just us. You and me. Like everything else." "I don't know how to deliver a baby." "We have the book. The one we bought in Helena. Get it." The labor lasted 16 hours. 16 hours of pain that rewrote Mara's understanding of what her body could endure. Contractions that felt like being torn apart from the inside. Moments where she was convinced she was dying, that this was how it ended. Rourke stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, reading instructions from the medical book with shaking hands, trying desperately to remember everything Mrs. McCready had told them. "You're doing great," he kept saying, though his face was gray with fear. "I'm dying." "You're not dying. You're bringing life. There's a difference." "Tell that to my body." Between contractions, she dozed fitfully, conserving strength. During them, she gripped Rourke's hand so hard she left bruises. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, wave after wave of agony that left her gasping. "I can't do this," she sobbed at one point, around hour 12. "Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know." "I'm not strong. I'm terrified." Being terrified and doing it anyway, that's the definition of strength. When the baby finally came, after hours of pushing that left Mara exhausted and shaking, Rourke caught her with trembling hands. A girl. Tiny and perfect, and screaming with outrage at being thrust into the cold world. "She's perfect," Rourke said through tears. "Mara, she's perfect." He cleaned the baby with shaking hands, following the book's instructions, then wrapped her in a blanket and placed her in Mara's arms. Mara looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful, and felt something crack open in her chest. This was her daughter. This little person had been inside her, and now she was here, real and alive and demanding attention. "What should we name her?" Rourke asked, his voice thick with emotion. Mara looked at this child born in a blizzard, born to parents who'd survived everything the world threw at them, born into a community built on stubborn hope. "Hope," she whispered. "Her name is Hope." And it fit, because that's what she was. Proof that something beautiful could come from something broken, that love could grow in the hardest soil, that the future didn't have to look like the past. Hope Vance came into the world screaming her defiance at the cold, and she never really stopped. She was loud and demanding and absolutely certain that the universe revolved around her needs. She didn't sleep through the night for the first 6 months, screamed when she was hungry, screamed when she was wet, screamed just because she felt like it. Mara walked around in a fog of exhaustion, barely able to string two thoughts together. Her body ached from childbirth. Her breasts hurt from nursing, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd slept more than 2 hours straight. "This is insane," she said one night at 3 a.m, Hope wailing in her arms. "This is parenthood," Rourke replied from where he was slumped in a chair, dark circles under his eyes. "How did people do this before?" "Badly, I imagine. Very, very badly." But despite the exhaustion, despite the constant noise and chaos, Mara had never been happier. There was something profoundly right about holding this tiny person, about watching her grow and change every day, about seeing Rourke transform into a father. He was gentle with Hope in a way he'd never been with anything else. Would spend hours just holding her, singing old Swedish lullabies that Jakob had taught him, telling her stories about her big sister Lily, who'd come before. "You think she minds?" Mara asked one night, watching him rock Hope to sleep. "Sarah, that you're happy again?" "I think she'd be glad. She always said life was too short to waste on grief, that the best way to honor the dead was to live fully." He looked up at Mara. "I wasted 3 years after she died. I'm not wasting any more." When Hope was 6 months old, they took her to visit Sarah and Lily's graves. Rourke had brought flowers from Mara's garden, the wildflowers that had survived winter and bloomed again in spring. "This is your sister," he said, holding Hope up to the headstones. "She would have loved you, would have taught you all kinds of mischief. She was 6 when she died, smart as a whip, wanted to be a doctor." Hope gurgled and grabbed at his beard with tiny fists. Mara knelt and placed her own flowers on the graves. "We're taking care of him," she said quietly to Sarah. "Like I promised. And we're taking care of each other. And now we're taking care of Hope. I hope that makes you proud. I hope you're at peace." The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of flowers and earth. Somewhere overhead, a hawk cried out. The prairie stretched endless in all directions, beautiful and brutal and home. They stayed until Hope got fussy, then rode back to the ranch in the golden afternoon light. The years that followed weren't easy. Ranching never was. They had droughts that killed half the cattle, winters so harsh they lost count of the frozen calves, summers so hot the creek dried up completely. There were equipment failures and money troubles, times when they didn't know if they'd make it through another season. When hope was 2, they had a son, Thomas, named for Mara's father. The labor was easier this time, only 8 hours, and with Mrs. McCready there to help. But Thomas was a difficult baby, colicky and fussy, crying for hours on end. "Why is he so angry?" Rourke asked, walking the floor at midnight with a screaming Thomas. "He's not angry. He's just loud about what he needs. He needs everything, all the time. Welcome to parenthood, again." Hope was fascinated by her baby brother. She'd sit beside his cradle and pat his head with surprising gentleness for a 2-year-old. "Baby," she'd say proudly. "My baby." "That's right, sweetheart. Your brother. Love, baby. I know you do." 3 years after Thomas, another daughter arrived, Sarah, named for Rourke's first wife. Mara had suggested it, and Rourke had cried when she did. "Are you sure?" he'd asked. "I'm sure. She's part of our story, part of what made you who you are. Her name should live on." Little Sarah was the easiest of the 3, sleeping through the night at 6 weeks, always smiling, content to watch the world go by. Hope and Thomas adored her, fighting over who got to hold her, who got to help feed her. The house that had once held only ghosts and silence was suddenly full of noise and chaos and life. Children's laughter echoed off the walls. Toys littered the floor. Sticky handprints marked every clean surface. The order Mara had once maintained was impossible now, and she found she didn't care. This was what home was supposed to sound like, messy and loud and full of love. Rourke never completely lost the shadows in his eyes. Some pain runs too deep to ever fully heal, but he learned to carry it differently, not as punishment, but as proof that he'd loved deeply enough to grieve. He learned to make room for joy alongside the sorrow, to let the laughter of his living children coexist with memories of the daughter he'd lost. "Does it ever stop hurting?" Mara asked one night after they'd put the children to bed. "No, but it hurts less, and the joy outweighs it now. That's the difference." Mara never stopped being stubborn, never stopped pushing back against the world when it tried to tell her she didn't matter. She'd learned young that survival meant fighting, and she taught her children the same lesson, not to be cruel, but to be strong, to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Other outcasts continued showing up at their door. Word had spread throughout the territory that the Vance Ranch was a place where broken people could heal, where second chances were given freely. A young Chinese woman named May arrived one spring, fleeing an arranged marriage she wanted no part of. She spoke little English but worked hard in the garden, teaching Mara techniques from her homeland that doubled their vegetable yields. A freed slave named Benjamin showed up one summer, working his way north to Canada, but stopping to help with harvest. He stayed 3 months, and by the time he left, he'd taught Rourke new methods for breaking horses and Thomas the alphabet. A Mexican family, the Garcias, came fleeing violence south of the border. They'd lost everything to bandits and arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Mara and Rourke gave them one of the far cabins Jacob had helped build, gave them work and dignity and a chance to rebuild. Some people stayed for a season and moved on. Others put down roots and became neighbors, expanding the community that had started with a barn raising. The network of families who looked out for each other grew, homesteaders and immigrants, freed slaves and refugees, all bound together by the simple truth that they mattered. When the Chen's barn burned down, accident, not arson, everyone showed up to rebuild it. When Widow Patterson got sick, the women took turns caring for her and managing her property until she recovered. When young Thomas McCready got lost in a blizzard, every man within 30 miles rode out to search until they found him, half frozen, but alive. They'd created something rare and precious, a place where the rejected and forgotten could become essential, where your past didn't define your worth, where community meant more than blood. The ranch prospered, not in the way of great wealth or fame, but in the way that mattered. It became a home, a real one, built on hard work and harder choices, on love that had been tested and refused to break. They expanded the house, 2 new rooms to hold their growing family. The barn was maintained meticulously, better than most in the territory. The garden flourished under May's expert care, vegetables and flowers growing in abundance. Chickens scratched in the yard. Cattle grazed on the hills. Children ran wild through it all, their laughter carried on the wind. Mara stood in her garden one spring morning, 10 years after she'd first arrived at this godforsaken ranch, and took stock of what they'd built. The house had been transformed, from a tomb to a home, from silence to symphony. The land that had seemed so hostile now felt like an extension of herself, every hill and creek as familiar as her own heartbeat. The community that had formed around them was proof that humans could thrive anywhere if they refused to give up on each other. "What are you thinking?" Rourke asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking about how far we've come, how much has changed." "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." "You?" "Just that it took me so long to see what was right in front of me, to understand that moving forward didn't mean forgetting." Mara turned in his arms. "We both had to find our way. That's nothing to regret." Hope came running up, 10 years old now, and already showing signs of the force of nature she'd become. "Mama, Thomas won't stop following me." Behind her, 7-year-old Thomas toddled after his sister with single-minded determination. "Hope, wait for me!" 4-year-old Sarah brought up the rear, her dark curls bouncing as she ran. "Wait for me too!" "Thomas, leave your sister alone," Mara called. "Hope, be nice to your brothers. You were little once too." "But he's annoying. He's 7. Being annoying is his job. It's not fair." "Life rarely is. You'll survive." Rourke laughed and scooped up Sarah, spinning her until she shrieked with delight. "And what's your job, little one?" "Being the cutest." "You're very good at it." Mara watched them, this family she'd built from nothing, this life she'd fought for, and felt her heart swell almost painfully. This was what she'd fought for. This was what had been worth every moment of fear and pain and uncertainty. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Hope grew into a fierce young woman with her mother's stubbornness and her father's intensity. She announced at 12 that she wanted to be a doctor, just like the sister she'd never met. "People said Lily couldn't do it because she was a girl," Hope declared. "I'm going to prove them wrong, for both of us." Mara and Rourke mortgaged part of the ranch to send her east to medical school. It was a sacrifice, but one they made gladly. Hope wrote letters home, describing her studies, her struggles to be taken seriously in a field dominated by men, her determination to succeed. "She reminds me of you," Rourke said, reading one of Hope's letters aloud. "Refuses to back down no matter what." "She reminds me of Lily," Mara replied. "From everything you've told me, same fire, same purpose." "Maybe she's both of them. The sister she never knew, living through her?" "Maybe. Or maybe she's just Hope. That's enough." Thomas was quieter than his sisters, but no less determined. He loved the ranch with a passion that surprised everyone, spending hours working with the horses, learning every inch of the land. At 16, he announced he wanted to take over when Rourke retired. "You sure?" Rourke asked. "It's a hard life. Lots of easier ways to make a living." "I don't want easy. I want this. I want to keep what you and Mama built." Rourke had to walk away for a moment, overcome with emotion. When he came back, his eyes were wet. "Then it's yours. When the time comes, it's yours." Sarah inherited her mother's love for growing things and her father's protective streak. She spent hours in the garden with May, learning not just how to make plants grow, but how to coax beauty from harsh conditions. At 18, she married a school teacher from Helena, a gentle man named David who loved her fierce spirit, and they settled nearby. "Don't go too far," Mara said at the wedding, trying not to cry. "I need you close." "I'm just in Helena, Mama, an hour's ride. I'll visit all the time." "Promise?" "Promise." The children all left eventually, as children do. But they came back, always came back. Because home wasn't just a place. It was the people who'd taught them that they mattered, that their lives had value, that dignity wasn't given, but claimed, defended, and lived. Mara and Rourke grew old together on that ranch. Their hair turned gray, their bodies slowed down, but their spirits remained fierce. They'd survived too much to let age defeat them. On quiet evenings, they still sat on the porch and watched the sunset, still held hands like young lovers, still marveled at what they'd built from nothing but stubborn hope and refusal to quit. "You know what I think?" Mara said one evening when they were both well into their 60s. What's that? I think we did it. We actually did it. We took all the pain and fear and ugliness the world threw at us, and we turned it into something beautiful. We did more than that. We proved that the people nobody wants become the ones who change everything. Is that what we did? Changed everything? For everyone who came through here? Yeah, we showed them they mattered. That's everything. Mara thought about all the people who'd passed through their lives, the outcasts and refugees, the broken and forgotten. May, who now ran her own successful garden supplying half the territory. Benjamin, who'd made it to Canada and started a school for freed slaves. The Garcias, whose children now own 3 successful businesses in Helena. We started something, didn't we? Something bigger than us. You started it. I just had the good sense to follow your lead. Liar. You were right there with me every step. Because you didn't give me a choice. Best decision I never made. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the prairie like a promise that joy could survive anything. When Rourke died, quietly in his sleep at 73, Mara buried him next to Sarah and Lily under the old oak tree. She'd known it was coming, had seen him fading for months, but it still felt like losing half of herself. She stood at his grave, with her children and grandchildren gathered around. Hope with her doctor's bag, Thomas with dirt under his nails from working the land, Sarah with flowers from her garden. Her grandchildren ranged in age from toddlers to teenagers, all of them carrying pieces of the legacy Mara and Rourke had built. This man taught me that love doesn't end, Mara said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. It just changes shape. He carried his first family in his heart while making room for a new one. He showed me that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about how you rebuild afterward. And he proved that one person can make a difference, as long as they're willing to try. Hope, now a successful doctor with her own practice, squeezed her mother's hand. He would be proud of you, Mama. Of all of us. I know, and I'm proud of him, for taking a chance on some stubborn woman who showed up on his doorstep and refused to leave. For teaching me that home isn't a place, it's people. For showing me that love is worth the risk, every single time. They buried him with his hat and his favorite book, and a letter from Mara that no one else would ever read. Private words between a wife and her husband, between 2 people who'd found each other in the hardest place and made it soft through sheer determination. My dearest Rourke, I know you're with Sarah and Lily now. I hope you're happy. I hope you're at peace. Thank you for seeing me when the world tried to make me invisible. Thank you for teaching me that I was worth fighting for. Thank you for every stubborn argument, every moment of laughter, every hard-won day we spent together. I'll take care of everything we built. I promise. The ranch, the community, the children, I'll make sure it all continues, that your legacy lives on. I love you. I'll always love you. And someday when my time comes, I'll find you again. We'll sit together and watch the sunset, just like we used to. Just like we always will. Forever yours, Mara lived another 9 years. Long enough to see all her grandchildren grown, to hold 3 great-grandchildren, to watch the ranch continue thriving under Thomas's careful management. She spent her final years in the garden, coaxing life from stubborn soil, proving every day that beautiful things could grow anywhere if you refused to give up on them. Her hands grew gnarled with age, her back bent, but she never stopped planting, never stopped believing in tomorrow. She died peacefully one autumn morning, surrounded by family. Her last words a whisper, "Tell Rourke I'm coming home." They buried her next to Rourke under the oak tree, the whole community turning out to pay respects. The headstone was simple. Mara Vance, 1853 to 1925. She refused to disappear. But her real legacy wasn't the stone or even the ranch. It was the network of communities throughout the territory built on the principle she'd lived by. That every person has worth, that dignity is claimed, not given, that the strongest communities are built by the people the world tried hardest to break. 75 years after Mara first arrived at that ranch, the story was still being told. How a woman cast out by her town had built a home in the wilderness. How she'd married a broken man and healed alongside him. How she'd stood up to cruelty and won. How she'd proven that the frontier wasn't just about land. It was about who you became when everything else was stripped away. Children grew up hearing about the Vance Ranch, about the woman who'd refused to back down, about the community built by outcasts who became essential. They learned that strength comes from surviving, that hope is a choice you make every day, that love is worth fighting for even when, especially when, it's hard. And every time someone told the story, they ended it the same way. She wasn't perfect. Neither was he. They fought and struggled and made mistakes, but they were brave enough to keep trying, to keep fighting, to keep loving even when it hurt. And that's the lesson. Dignity isn't given. It's claimed, defended, and lived. Every single day. No matter how hard it gets, no matter who tries to stop you, you claim it, you fight for it, you live it. That's what it means to be human. That's what it means to matter. The ranch still stands today. Different owners, different families, but the spirit remains. A place where broken people can heal. Where second chances aren't just possible, they're expected. Where community means seeing the worth in everyone, especially those the world has cast aside. There's a plaque now, mounted near the barn, that's been rebuilt a dozen times, but still stands in the same spot where Mara and Rourke once worked side by side. In memory of Mara and Rourke Vance, who proved that home is built by those brave enough to stay. And on clear evenings, when the wind blows just right across the prairie, locals swear you can still hear it, the sound of children laughing, of a music box playing, of two people who loved each other despite every reason not to, whose stubborn refusal to disappear changed everything. That's their story. That's their legacy. Two outcasts who refused to disappear, who loved fiercely, who built something that lasted long after they were gone. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for. To matter, to be remembered, to leave the world a little better than we found it. They did that. Against all odds, against every obstacle, against a world that tried to break them. They did that. And their story continues, carried on the wind across the prairie, a reminder that hope is the most stubborn thing of all, and the most worth fighting for.